Gavel drops. Silence. Wait. Judge Caprio's voice cracks. His hand trembles. The defendant looks up. Recognition hits like lightning. Tony. The entire courtroom holds its breath. Frankie. Tears. Instant tears from both men. The bailiff steps forward, confused. Spectators lean in. Something extraordinary is happening. Something that will change everything. What happens next will restore your faith in humanity and justice. The Providence Municipal Court was packed. Another Tuesday morning. Another routine traffic violation. Case number 4847. Anthony Capobianco vs. the State of Rhode Island. Failure to pay parking tickets totaling $2,300. Standard procedure: read charges, determine ability to pay, set payment plan or issue warrant. But nothing about this case would be standard. Judge Frank Caprio adjusted his glasses, picked up the file, and looked across his courtroom at the defendant. Middle-aged man. Worn clothes. Nervous hands fidgeting with a baseball cap. Head down, avoiding eye contact like so many others who stood before him daily, ashamed of their circumstances. Anthony Capobianco. Judge Caprio read the name aloud, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years on the bench. The man looked up. And in that moment, everything stopped. The recognition was instant. Overwhelming. Undeniable. Frank Caprio's eyes widened. His mouth opened slightly. The file in his hands began to shake. 67 years old, and suddenly he was 8 years old again, running through the streets of Federal Hill, playing stickball until sunset, sharing penny candy from Silo's bakery. Tony. The word came out as barely a whisper. The defendant's eyes filled with tears immediately. Frankie. The courtroom went dead silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Everyone sensed they were witnessing something unprecedented, something that transcended the usual business of municipal court. But nobody was prepared for what Judge Caprio would do next. Without hesitation, without regard for protocol, Judge Frank Caprio stood up from his bench. In 30 years as a judge, he had never done this. The bailiff's hand instinctively moved toward his radio, unsure if this was a security issue. "Your Honor," the prosecutor whispered, confusion evident in her voice. Judge Caprio raised his hand for silence. His eyes never left Anthony's face. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped down from the bench. The elevated platform that symbolized the authority of the court, the separation between judge and judged, between power and powerlessness. He walked directly to his childhood friend. And then something magical happened that would be talked about for decades. Without saying a word, Judge Caprio opened his arms. Anthony Capobianco, defendant in case #4847, fell into his childhood friend's embrace. Two men in their 60s, crying like children, holding each other in the middle of a municipal courtroom while dozens of people watched in stunned silence. "I haven't seen you since." Judge Caprio's voice broke. "Since your mother's funeral," Anthony finished. 43 years ago. The courtroom erupted. Not in noise, but in emotion. Spectators were pulling out tissues. The court stenographer was crying. Even the bailiff, a tough ex-Marine, had to clear his throat and look away. Subscribe now and comment what you think about what happened next, because Judge Caprio's decision will challenge everything you believe about justice. Judge Caprio held his friend at arm's length, studying his face. The years had been hard on Tony. Lines of struggle, of disappointment, of life not turning out as planned. This wasn't the confident kid who used to beat everyone at marbles in the schoolyard. "What happened, Tony?" Judge Caprio asked softly. "Tell me what happened." Anthony wiped his eyes. "Life, Frankie. Life happened." The judge looked at the file in his hands. $2,300 in unpaid parking tickets. Behind each ticket was a story. A man trying to get to work. Trying to take care of family. Trying to survive in a city where parking was expensive and wages weren't enough. But Judge Caprio was about to learn something that would make this case even more extraordinary. "Tell me about the tickets, Tony. Help me understand." Anthony's voice shook as he began. "My wife, she's got lupus, Frankie. Real bad. I've been taking her to treatments at Rhode Island Hospital 3 times a week for 2 years. The parking garage costs $15 a day. $45 a week just to park so she can get treatment to stay alive." Judge Caprio felt his chest tighten. $2,340 a year just to park at the hospital. "I tried to pay the meters, but sometimes the treatments run long. Sometimes they run 6, 7 hours. The meters only go 2 hours. By the time I come down, there's tickets. And when you're spending every penny on co-pays and medications." Anthony's voice trailed off. The judge looked at the file again. 23 tickets. All from the hospital district. All on treatment days. All because a man was choosing between feeding his family and feeding parking meters while his wife fought for her life. What nobody in that courtroom knew was that Judge Caprio was about to make a decision that would change his friend's life forever. "Tony," Judge Caprio said quietly, "where's Maria now?" "She passed last month." Anthony's voice broke completely. "The cancer spread. We fought it for 3 years, but..." Judge Caprio closed his eyes. In that moment, he wasn't a judge. He wasn't an authority figure. He was Frank from Federal Hill, 8 years old again, remembering when Tony's little sister died of pneumonia and how Tony had cried for days. "The tickets," Judge Caprio said slowly, "they're from before she passed. Most of them. Last few are from settling her affairs. Had to keep going back to the hospital, to the doctors, handling paperwork." Anthony couldn't continue. Judge Caprio turned to face his courtroom. 40 people who had come expecting routine municipal business were witnessing something profound. A moment where law met life, where justice confronted compassion, where the system encountered the human heart. And then Judge Frank Caprio did something unprecedented in his 3 decades on the bench. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the courtroom, his voice carrying new authority, "what you're witnessing today is why I became a judge. Not to punish people who are struggling. Not to kick people when they're down. But to remember that behind every case number is a human being." He turned back to Anthony. "Tony, I'm dismissing all charges. The city of Providence forgives your debt. But more than that." Judge Caprio reached into his wallet. "Take this." He handed Anthony $200 in cash. "Your Honor," the prosecutor stood up, "I don't think." "Sit down," Judge Caprio commanded with an authority that silenced the room. "This is my courtroom, and this is my decision." Anthony stared at the money in his hands, tears streaming down his face. "Frankie, I can't." "Yes, you can. That's for food. For rent. For whatever you need to get back on your feet. Because that's what friends do for each other." The courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of people crying. Phone cameras appeared as spectators realized they were witnessing something that belonged to history, not just municipal court. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. What he said next would be quoted in law schools for decades to come. "Everyone in this courtroom needs to understand something," Judge Caprio announced, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of wisdom. "I see hundreds of people in here every week. People who made mistakes. People who are struggling. People who are fighting battles we know nothing about." He gestured to Anthony. "This man spent 3 years watching his wife die. 3 years choosing between parking meters and medicine. 3 years putting her needs before everything else, including his own legal troubles. That's not a criminal. That's a hero." Anthony was sobbing now. So were half the people in the courtroom. "The law is important," Judge Caprio continued. But compassion is more important. Justice without mercy isn't justice at all. It's just cruelty with a gavel. But Judge Caprio had one more surprise that would leave everyone speechless. He turned to his bailiff. "Officer Martinez, I want you to give Mr. Capobianco your card. If he needs help finding work, if he needs help with anything, he calls you. That's an order." Then he addressed the prosecutor. "Counselor, I want you to personally review every hospital parking ticket that comes through this court. If someone is dealing with medical issues, with family crises, with genuine hardship, you bring those cases to my attention. We're not in the business of profiting from people's pain." The prosecutor nodded, visibly moved. Judge Caprio looked around his courtroom one final time. This is what justice looks like. Not punishment for the sake of punishment. Not revenue collection disguised as law enforcement. But human beings helping other human beings. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause. Not polite clapping, but the kind of applause reserved for moments that change you. People were standing, crying, reaching for their phones to share what they'd just witnessed. Anthony couldn't speak. He kept trying to find words, but emotion overwhelmed him every time. Finally, he managed to whisper, "Thank you, Frankie. Thank you for remembering." "Thank you," Judge Caprio replied, "for reminding me why I do this job." The video of what happened next would be seen by millions around the world. As Anthony turned to leave, Judge Caprio called out one final time. "Tony. You call me, okay? Don't be a stranger for another 43 years. Anthony nodded, clutching the $200 like a lifeline, and walked out of the courtroom to thunderous applause. Judge Caprio returned to his bench, composed himself, and called the next case. But everyone knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Something that proved the justice system could still have a heart. Within hours, the video went viral. Someone in the courtroom had recorded the entire interaction. By evening, #Judge Caprio was trending worldwide. The video had been shared millions of times. News outlets from CNN to BBC were calling for interviews. But more importantly, people were inspired. Share this video if you believe in compassion over punishment, and subscribe because stories like this need to be told. The story didn't end in that courtroom. Anthony found work through connections Judge Caprio helped him make. He started attending grief counseling. He rebuilt his life, one day at a time. Judge Caprio received thousands of letters from around the world. People sharing their own stories of struggle, of loss, of finding hope in unexpected places. Many sent donations for him to help other people in similar situations. A year later, Anthony returned to the courtroom. Not as a defendant, but as a volunteer, helping other people navigate the system that had once overwhelmed him. The impact reached far beyond Providence, Rhode Island. Other judges began implementing Caprio protocols, reviewing cases for underlying hardship, offering resources instead of just penalties, remembering that their job was to serve justice, not just enforce rules. Law schools started showing the video in classes about judicial discretion and compassionate jurisprudence. The moment when Judge Caprio stepped down from his bench became symbolic of justice that serves humanity rather than bureaucracy. But perhaps the most important impact was the simplest. Two childhood friends, separated by 4 decades and the circumstances of life, had found each other again. In a place designed for judgment and punishment, they had rediscovered love and compassion. And in doing so, they had shown the world what justice could look like when tempered by mercy, what authority could accomplish when guided by empathy, and what friendship meant when tested by time and hardship. The gavel that had started the day as a symbol of judicial power had become something else entirely, a tool for healing, for connection, for reminding everyone that behind every case number is a human heart that deserves compassion. That Tuesday morning in Providence Municipal Court, Judge Frank Caprio didn't just dismiss parking tickets. He proved that the justice system works best when it remembers its humanity. And his childhood friend Tony proved that it's never too late for friendship to triumph over circumstance. The case file was closed. But the story of compassion it contained would inspire people for generations to come. 3 years later, the impact was still growing. Judge Frank Caprio received a letter that would change everything again. It was from Anthony, but it wasn't what anyone expected. "Dear Frankie," the letter began, "I wanted you to know that Maria left me a life insurance policy I didn't know about. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I've been thinking about what you did for me that day, and I want to do something for others." What Anthony proposed was revolutionary, a fund specifically for people facing medical hardships who couldn't afford parking while seeking treatment. He wanted to call it Maria's Hope. But that wasn't the most remarkable part of his letter. "I've been volunteering at the hospital where Maria received treatment," Anthony continued. "Helping families navigate the system, connecting them with resources, making sure they don't have to choose between parking meters and medicine. I see you in what I do every day, Frankie. You taught me that second chances aren't just about receiving them, they're about giving them." Judge Caprio read the letter 3 times before he could speak. His secretary found him in his chambers, crying over a piece of paper. "What is it, Judge?" she asked. "It's what justice is supposed to look like," he replied. The Maria's Hope Fund launched 6 months later. Judge Caprio used his platform to promote it. The viral video had given him a voice that reached far beyond Providence Municipal Court. Speaking at law schools, judicial conferences, and community events, he told the story of his childhood friend and challenged his colleagues to remember their humanity. "We have a choice every day," he would say. "We can be part of the problem, or part of the solution. We can add to someone's burden, or help them carry it." The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in from around the world. Hospitals began implementing programs to help patients with transportation and parking costs. Other judges started their own compassion funds. But the most profound change happened in Providence itself. Anthony had become something of a local celebrity. People recognized him on the street, the man whose reunion with Judge Caprio had touched millions. Instead of hiding from his past struggles, he embraced his role as an advocate for others facing similar challenges. He testified before the city council about the burden of municipal fines on struggling families. He worked with social services to identify people who needed help before their problems became legal issues. He became living proof that people could overcome their circumstances with the right support. 5 years after that Tuesday morning in court, something extraordinary happened. Anthony was offered a position with the Rhode Island Department of Social Services. His job, helping people navigate the system that had once overwhelmed him. The kid from Federal Hill who had dropped out of high school, who had struggled with addiction in his 20s, who had spent years caring for a dying wife, was now a state employee helping others find hope. At his swearing-in ceremony, guess who administered the oath? Judge Frank Caprio stood before his childhood friend one more time. But this time, instead of a gavel in his hands, he held a Bible. Instead of judicial robes, Anthony wore a suit and tie. Instead of tears of desperation, both men cried tears of joy. "Raise your right hand," Judge Caprio said formally. Then, breaking protocol as he had years before, he added with a smile, "You ready for this, Tony?" "Ready, Frankie." The ceremony was broadcast live on local television. The same news outlets that had covered their emotional reunion now documented Anthony's transformation from defendant to state employee. The symbolism was powerful, redemption was possible, second chances could change lives, and friendship could overcome any obstacle. In his first speech as a state employee, Anthony said something that would be quoted in social work textbooks for years to come: "Judge Caprio didn't just dismiss my case that day. He dismissed my belief that I was beyond help, beyond hope, beyond redemption. That's what true justice looks like." The ripple effects continued to spread. Law students from Harvard and Yale made pilgrimages to Providence Municipal Court to observe Judge Caprio in action. They watched him apply the same compassion to every case, looking beyond the charges to find the human story underneath. A documentary crew followed Judge Caprio for 6 months, creating a film called The Heart of Justice that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. The film won awards, but more importantly, it inspired other judges to examine their own approach to the bench. Social media influencers began promoting #CaprioCompassion, sharing stories of times when authority figures had shown mercy instead of punishment. The hashtag became a movement, encouraging people in positions of power to lead with empathy. But perhaps the most touching development came from an unexpected source. Children in Providence elementary schools began learning about Judge Caprio and Anthony's story as part of their curriculum on citizenship and community. Teachers used their reunion to discuss friendship, forgiveness, and the importance of helping others. One third-grade class wrote letters to both men. 8-year-old Isabella Martinez wrote, "Dear Judge Caprio, you showed me that grown-ups can be friends even when one is in trouble. Thank you for being kind." 7-year-old Marcus Johnson wrote to Anthony, "Dear Mr. Tony, I'm sorry your wife died. But I'm happy you help other people now. That makes her proud in heaven." Judge Caprio kept every letter in a special folder in his desk. "These children understand justice better than most adults," he told reporters. 10 years after their reunion, both men were invited to speak at Harvard Law School. Standing together at the podium where Supreme Court justices and legal scholars had addressed students, the boy from Federal Hill who became a judge and the boy from Federal Hill who became an advocate shared their story with the next generation of lawyers. "The law is not just words on paper," Judge Caprio told the packed auditorium. "It's a living thing that either helps people or hurts them. Your choice is whether you'll use your legal education to build bridges or walls." Anthony added, "I used to think the system was against people like me. But Frank showed me that the system is only as good as the people who work in it. You can be those people. You can be the ones who remember that behind every case is a human being who deserves dignity." The standing ovation lasted 15 minutes. The story that began with unpaid parking tickets had become a testament to the power of human connection. Judge Caprio eventually retired, but not before establishing the Caprio Center for Compassionate Justice at his alma mater. The center trains judges and court personnel in trauma-informed practices and restorative justice techniques. Anthony continued his work with the state until his own retirement, helping thousands of families navigate difficult circumstances. He never remarried, but he often said he felt Maria's presence in every person he helped. On the 20th anniversary of their reunion, Providence declared Compassion in Justice Day. The city unveiled a plaque in the municipal courthouse commemorating the moment when Judge Caprio stepped down from his bench to embrace his childhood friend. The inscription read, "In memory of all those who choose compassion over judgment, mercy over punishment, and love over law." Both men, now in their 80s, attended the ceremony. They still met for coffee every Tuesday morning, the same day of the week when their lives had intersected again in that courtroom 2 decades earlier. "You know what I learned that day?" Judge Caprio reflected during the ceremony. "I learned that the highest form of justice isn't punishment. It's restoration. It's helping people find their way back to wholeness." Anthony nodded, looking at the plaque that would remind future generations of their story. "And I learned that friendship isn't just about the good times. It's about being there when someone needs a second chance, a helping hand, or just someone to remember that they matter." The two boys from Federal Hill had grown into men who changed their community, their profession, and countless individual lives. Their story proved that leadership isn't about the power to punish, but the wisdom to heal. That justice works best when tempered by mercy. That friendship can survive any separation and overcome any obstacle. And that sometimes, the most important moments in our lives happen when we least expect them, in the most unlikely places, between people who never forgot that we're all just human beings trying to find our way home. The gavel had long since been retired. The case files had been archived. But the legacy of compassion they created together would echo through courtrooms and communities for generations to come, reminding everyone that the truest measure of justice isn't how harshly we can punish, but how generously we can forgive.